Is Barbie becoming Buddhist? We'll take a look at this strange phenomenon coming right up. I'm Doug Smith of the Online Dharma Institute. That's onlinedharma.org if you want to learn more about material Dharma from early Buddhism. If you're new to this channel and interested in living a wiser and a kinder and a calmer life, consider subscribing to the channel and click the bell down below if you want to receive notifications when I come out with new videos. So there was a recent article in Lion's Roar magazine that highlighted this strange phenomenon of Barbie apparently becoming Buddhist, or at least showing some signs of having read some Dharma material. I have to admit that it's all a bit mystifying to me. I didn't realize that Barbie was anything other than a sort of a plastic doll. But, you know, you learn something new every day. And so what we're going to do in today's video is to look into some of this. Now, there's clearly, you know, when you get into this kind of topic, there's a massive room for just doing a video that's just snark from beginning to end. I'm not going to do that. That's sort of not my style, number one. And number two, I think that there's actually some interesting material to get into here that we can discuss, both with respect to Mattel Barbie, Mattel being the company that makes Barbie, and in a sort of a broader context. And we'll also turn towards a negative video that was also out coming at this same phenomenon from a rather different angle. We'll get to that as well farther along in the video. So this recent magazine article from Lion's Roar highlights the fact that Barbie's come out as a kind of a vlogger. She's got YouTube videos. And here they, in this article, I'll link to all the material that I'll be discussing today. I'll link to down in the show notes in case you're interested in seeing it. But in this article, they talk about two videos in particular. Now, this is an article that was written recently in the last few months. However, these videos, to be clear, are not recent. One is from 2017, and the other is from 2019. So these are old videos already. Nevertheless, the article highlights the fact that Barbie seems to have become a kind of a Buddhist vlogger, at least from a certain kind of perspective. She talks about integrating a meditation routine into her everyday kind of, the kinds of things she does when she wakes up.
Every morning when I first wake up, before I look at my phone or wash up or get dressed, I meditate. It really helps me stay focused for the entire day.
And Barbie also gives a kind of a short introduction to mindfulness of breathing, of all things. Here it is.
You're going to take a deep inhale through your nose and then breathe out through your mouth. I like to count to help relax and focus me. Breathe in, 1, 2, 3. Breathe out, 1, 2, 3.
Now, interestingly, Barbie's introduction here is a little bit non-standard, at least in the way that I was always taught mindfulness of breathing. This idea that we have to breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth, that's something that we're not generally, at least I was never taught to do it that way in a Buddhist context, nor was I taught to count the length of the breath. Rather, generally in Buddhist counting meditation, you count each breath individually, or the in-breath is 1 and the out-breath is 2. These may seem small differences, but I think they're differences that may highlight where this material comes from, in the sense that my guess is, and perhaps you know differently, but my guess would be that Barbie's mindfulness of breathing exercises here come from yoga rather than from, let's say, mindfulness of breathing from a Buddhist context. In yoga, they're much more interested in, let's say, breathing through the nose and out through the mouth. They're much more interested in the length of the breath being something that we have to pay attention to, so you would count the length of the breath in the way that we really don't in Buddhist meditation. And Barbie does have yoga Barbies, and certainly yoga was and has been more popular, at least relatively farther back, shall we say, than meditation. Yoga was sort of here first, in a certain sense, in the West, as becoming a sort of a popular phenomenon among Western folks who might be interested in buying something like this. And again, this yoga here isn't really Buddhist. It comes out of more of a Hindu tradition, although it has been secularized in the West. In another more recent video, her video, I believe it's from 2019, Barbie is discussing what really amounts to a loving-kindness meditation, although she frames it as a meditation on forgiveness. And interestingly, she actually refers to the meditation by its Pali name, which is metta. Metta is the Pali word for loving-kindness. Here's what she says.
And I found this thing called metta meditation, or loving-kindness meditation. I want to share it with you because it's great.
Now Barbie teaches this as a forgiveness meditation, which is really not so much of a Buddhist way of looking at it. In the early texts in Buddhism, this kind of meditation is a meditation on kindness generally, and forgiveness is, of course, we might think of it as a subtopic within the general topic of kindness. So loving kindness is an attempt to broaden this kind of kindness out to the world. Now, the technique that Barbie discusses here, the meditation technique that she actually goes through and discusses, I'm not going to cite the entire video here, or at least that part, it's kind of long, but basically it's interesting to note that the practice that she comes up with is one that's probably, and my guess is, from somebody like Sharon Salzberg. Sharon Salzberg being the foremost propounder of this kind of loving-kindness meditation nowadays. She has a wonderful book called Loving Kindness, which I'll put a link to down in the show notes below in case you don't know it. And Sharon Salzberg herself got the practice that she talks about in detail in that book. She got it, at least indirectly, from a 5th century book called the Visuddhimagga, which is written by Buddhaghosa. The actual technique that she's talking about doesn't go back to the Buddha himself. It goes back to this 5th century text, which is a millennium after the Buddha's lifetime. And in this strategy, we begin by extending loving kindness to ourselves. May I be happy, you say that. And then we extend it first to somebody who's close to us, or a benefactor is the way it's usually given, but I believe Barbie talks about it being somebody close to us. May you be happy. And then on to somebody who we may know but not know very well. May you be happy. And then towards a difficult person or an enemy. May you be happy. Now that's, of course, the most difficult. And then finally, we extend it out to the entire world, and may all living beings be happy. That's the strategy here. And except for the last stage, all of this comes from the Visuddhimagga, all of this comes from Buddhaghosa. So it's actually quite interesting to notice where Barbie gets this material, at least indirectly, from in a long chain up to the present day practice that she's giving us over YouTube. So for a very short introduction about loving-kindness meditation, this is actually quite a good introduction. I mean, given the amount of space and time that the video takes in putting this material across, it's actually quite good, in my opinion. It's not everything, it's not as deep as we might want in our perfect world, but it's almost certainly too much for your average child to take on board in 2 or 3 minutes. There's really much more than one is really going to be expected to understand here, and I think that says something. That says that they were really trying to get something across, even though there was probably too much here for your average person to really comprehend. Now, in a more recent video, and one that actually the Lion's Roar article doesn't mention, Barbie does a longer guided meditation using something called the Headspace app. Now, I don't myself use this app. My understanding is that this is one of these guided meditation or meditation helping apps that you can have on your iPhone or whatever. I use Insight Timer, which is, I think, a little bit more bare bones than Headspace. Insight Timer is fine for me. But in any event, in this other video, Barbie goes in a much longer, or uses this app, or a particular guided meditation in this app, to go in more depth and detail into a longer guided meditation. And I'll leave a link to that video down below. I'll leave a link to all this stuff, as I say, in case you want to see it. Now, another thing that this Lion's Roar article doesn't mention is that while Barbie is presented as a vlogger here who is interested in meditation, in fact, these examples of Barbie's vlogging seem to be marketing a particular doll, a particular Barbie doll. And indeed, there was, and indeed it's still available, a Barbie doll where Barbie is doing meditation. So it's a Barbie doll that's intended to get across guided meditation. It's called the Breathe With Me Barbie. And if you look at the website, the Mattel website on this doll, it says, in fact, this meditation-themed doll celebrates one of her favorite ways to recharge using lights and sound, mindfulness meditation. And the doll includes 5 different guided meditations, apparently, that can be accessed by touching a button on it. And all of this is really quite head-spinning from a Buddhist perspective, in particular from a perspective on early Buddhism, which is sort of where I come from, although from a secular perspective myself. What I would say is that I can anticipate several different possible reactions to all of this stuff, which are all worth discussing. The first reaction, which is I think going to be perhaps the strongest reaction among a certain number of you, is going to be negative. That is to say that this is all an attempt to sort of cash in on the mindfulness craze. A sort of a cynical attempt, if you like, to make money off of selling plastic toys to people instead of actually doing anything that's really mindful. This doll here is presented as a doll that's getting across mindfulness, but obviously buying a plastic toy is not very mindful, and simply owning a plastic toy is not really going to get you any closer to the ideals of mindfulness than you were before. So, certainly there is indeed a story to be told here, a reaction to have, a reasonable reaction, which is quite cynical here. This is a kind of, Madison Avenue marketing of the mindfulness craze, and perhaps we might even say one of its worst examples. That is, we might say that this is another attempt to degrade the Dharma by selling plastic toys. And it's even worse in the sense that Barbie is sort of known for this impossibly thin, kind of lily-white persona, which to many of us is something of a turnoff. Although, to be fair, Mattel has in recent years been trying to get Barbie away from that iconic symbolism, shall we say, towards a more inclusive kind of doll anyway, in different body types, different forms, different colors, different shapes, and all the rest. We also have to say, I think, that when we're talking about degrading the Dharma by selling things, selling objects, dolls, and so on, that, for millennia, people have been selling Buddhist icons. It's part of Buddhist culture, since virtually the beginning of Buddhism, certainly since the dawn of the new era, the Common Era. I have behind me a couple of Buddhist icons. Is a Barbie doll any different? Well, in certain ways it is, and in certain ways it isn't. I'm simply saying that selling material that gets across an ideal of meditation is something that has a long history in Buddhism, and indeed in every religion. But still in all, this is definitely an example of a big business sort of trying to cash in on mindfulness. There's no doubt about that. Now, there's a second potential reaction that we might have, that meditators might have, Buddhists perhaps, might have to this, which is that it's something a little bit more positive. That by producing a doll that at least expresses some of the ideals of a certain kind of spiritual practice, that the doll company, Mattel, is trying to do something a little bit better than their average Barbie, let's say. Certainly producing a Barbie doll that is emphasizing the value of meditative insight is somewhat better than, let's say, their fashionista line, which is clearly a much, much bigger piece of the Barbie puzzle than this particular small little corner. That is to say, most of what they do is selling fashion dolls. And there's almost no doubt in my mind that they're going to make much more money by selling the fashion dolls than by selling this kind of meditation Barbie. And I would expect they knew that. And insofar as a company is willing to spend time and effort and money on something that is, let's say, less lucrative, but at least has the potential for doing some good by promoting or making more mainstream certain kinds of spiritual practices, there's something laudable about that. I mean, we don't necessarily need to think of it in entirely cynical terms. That is to say, Mattel, by producing this doll, is trying to, at least appears to be trying to, make these kinds of practices less strange, less weird, more understandable, more the sorts of things that young people might accept into their own lives, and that they might actually use to make their lives better. And that certainly is the take that the Lion's Roar article has about this, and indeed also there's a thread about this same phenomenon over at Sutta Central, which is one of the leading forums about Buddhism and early Buddhism. And in that thread as well, most of the comments that I could see were positive about this. That, while it's not entirely positive, there certainly are some concerns, that nevertheless, on the whole, it seems to be a relatively beneficial way for a toy company to move. Now, but nevertheless, I think the elephant in the room here, in a way, is the notion of Buddhism in particular, that is to say, a religion, which is sort of standing behind all of this. Now, in none of the Barbie material that I could see was there any mention of the word Buddhism or Buddhist, nor was there, I would expect, although I haven't looked, but my expectation is there wouldn't have been any mention of Hinduism within any discussion of yoga that Barbie would take. And so, the question is, to what extent this is really an example of, let's say, Buddhism. And personally, I think I would be less accepting of this kind of thing if it were labeled Buddhist. If she really actually were, if Barbie actually were labeled as Buddhist Barbie or something of the kind, or Hindu Barbie. Unless this was one of a wide range of religions that were and non-religions that were put together at the same time by the company, and even then I think there would be questions, legitimate questions from people of different religions whether this was really appropriate. Still, I mean, I would think that would be more of a problem. And indeed, one particular video on YouTube that pushes back on this Barbie ideal, is a video from a Christian perspective that looks at this meditation Barbie and terms it religious propaganda at its finest. And here we can see where the problems can arise. That by producing a doll like this, if it is understood to be Buddhist, that is going to raise problems with people. And indeed, this other video makes clear from their perspective that the only appropriate sort of meditation is meditation on the Word of God as found in the Bible. As they say,
the Bible tells us to fill our minds with God's Word and meditate on them, not to empty our minds so that demonic forces can enter in.
Now, one, I think, legitimate question here is whether meditation really is for emptying the mind. And I would argue, and have argued actually in a past video, that that's not the case. Meditation's not about emptying our minds or making our minds blank or any such thing. That's far from the point of meditation. I'll leave a link to that video down below in case you want to see it. But nevertheless, this is an example of sort of misunderstandings that could come up here. Indeed, there is a long history of Christian meditators of all types. Some who may meditate on the Bible and others who may do a more general meditation and who may find help from the kinds of practices given in these videos. Now, later on in this video that I've been discussing, this video that's quite negative about this meditation Barbie, they make clear that I think their real aim is to open up a possibility for a Christian Barbie.
So we have Barbie in a variety of nationalities. We have wheelchair Barbie, different body type Barbies, gender neutral Barbie, witchcraft Barbie, New Age Hindu Buddhist Barbie. Now I'm just waiting for let's have Bible study and pray together Barbie.
So their claim is that this meditation Barbie is a New Age Hindu Buddhist Barbie. That, I think, is central to their suggestion that there should also be a Christian Barbie who is interested in the Bible and in prayer. But is it really true that this meditation Barbie is a Hindu Buddhist Barbie? And I would argue that that's not the case. Now, while I have said that the practice, the loving kindness practice that we find in one of these videos did, at least in its history, seem to come from passages in the Visuddhimagga, which is a 5th century of the Common Era Buddhist text, that practice is not specifically Buddhist. That is to say, it's a practice that anybody of any religion or indeed of no religion could use. It's a very ecumenical practice in that sense. And as I also said, in the Barbie video, that practice is presented as a forgiveness practice. And it's not presented that way in this Visuddhimagga, in this 5th century text. That is a modern understanding, and indeed an understanding that I would argue comes out of Christianity. Because forgiveness is a particularly Christian sort of state of mind. It's a particularly Christian framing of kindness, in that God is supposed to forgive our sins, and so we may use that as impetus or as a kind of a way of understanding other people and forgiving the harm that they do us. So is Barbie really becoming Buddhist here? I would argue no. She's becoming what we might call spiritual, more spiritual, at least in these aspects. Now, being spiritual, that's a very difficult term for many of us. It's a kind of an amorphous term. It's not clear what it really means, but it indicates at least a kind of an ethical practice, an ecumenical ethical practice that's open to people from every religion or no religion. And when we see it from that light, I think, we see it in I think, more of the intent that Mattel would have had, let's say, in producing this material. They're certainly not going to produce something that they feel is going to be detrimental to anybody of any particular belief system. I myself have done meditation in settings that are Buddhist and non-Buddhist, next to people who are practicing Christians and practicing Jews, and people from other religions or no religion. And I think all of us are able to do the same or virtually the same practices together. We don't need to necessarily feel that we're in competition with each other in this respect if we're doing the same kinds of spiritual practices or ethical practices. Now, as I have already said, it's possible to be cynical about all this, but my own background and intent is to see the glass as half full whenever possible. And in this respect, I think seeing this as an ecumenical attempt to make spiritual practice more mainstream, and ethical practice more mainstream, there's a great deal that we can see as half full here. And having said that, this topic is also interesting from a sociocultural perspective. The way that meditation now, like yoga before, another Indian term that has become mainstream in the West, these metta and yoga, Indian terms that have become more mainstream, this kind of secular spirituality has become more at home now in the West and in most of the world, or in large parts of the world, or at least, shall we say, segments of those parts of the world. That these practices are no longer the sole ownership of, let's say, a church or a sangha, but are rather in the air, practices that lay people can become aware of through secular means as well as spiritual, or I should say religious means, can make their own, whether they're from the particular tradition in question or not. And these practices, let's be fair, these practices of loving kindness, of forgiveness, of metta, are practices that we should know about. They're practices that will make our life better if we actually undertake them on a regular basis. And so they're worth making more broadly known. And indeed, I would argue that if you want to know more, and you should, take a look at some of my prior videos on metta, on loving kindness, and the other related states, these beneficial states of emotion that we really should practice and know about. I did an earlier series of videos on that. I'll put a link to it up on the screen here. Thanks so much to all of you. If you're getting something out of these videos, please take a look at my Patreon page and join us. See you later.